Oath of Vengeance Paladin and Pact of the Blade Warlock is an incredibly powerful multiclass dealing large amounts of melee damage when you get to the late or end game of Baldur's Gate 3. So let's go ahead and take a look at the build. Alright, at level 1 we're going to select the Paladin. This will give us access to Lay on Hands, which is a nice heal to have, and this scales with level, just getting stronger and stronger as the game goes on. We also get Divine Sense. This is a bonus action, and although it isn't our strongest bonus action, it's a good opportunity to mention that you want to make sure that you're utilizing your bonus actions. The gist of this build is to run in and melee things with your regular action, and it's easy to forget that you've also got a bonus action to take advantage of. Oftentimes you want to use your bonus action to buff yourself before performing the action, so make sure that you have that mindset as you're playing this character or build. Divine Sense is going to give us advantage on attack rolls against Celestials, Fiends, and Undead, and it lasts for 2 turns. In addition to this, we'll get the class feature, Channel Oath Charges, and this will make more sense with the subclass Oath of Vengeance, as our first action, Inquisitor's Might, costs a Channel Oath Charge. Now this is a bonus action as well, and in this case it's a 2-turn buff that increases our own or an ally's weapon attack to deal an additional 3 radiant damage and can also daze them. So the idea here would be to actually use your bonus action first to add this buff, then go in and perform your melee attacks, just allowing you to do additional damage on each of these attacks. Once you reach level 5 in the Warlock multiclass, you'll want to reserve this bonus action for the extra attack that Pact of the Blade will then grant. Here we have the ability scores. There's going to be a lot of deviation depending on what level you're doing this build at, depending on what equipment you have access to. This is a general version that I really like, and you can certainly change this as I said. However, let's go through it. We're just going to tank Strength, Intellect, and Wisdom. The reason for this is because we're going to be able to use Charisma as our modifier for our attack weapon rolls as well as our damage rolls, so we don't actually need the Strength. We won't get the synergy until we get the Warlock classes going as well, so make sure that if you're trying this build from the get-go that you change your ability scores. You would definitely want to perhaps remove your dex and boost your strength so that you can actually hit things until you have the Pact of the Blade from the Warlock multiclass. You can also choose to do things like increase your int and wisdom to 10 so that you don't have negatives on saving throws. Like I said, definitely flexible, but I'll tell you the reason that I've done this. We're planning on taking ability improvement at level 4 as a feat, which will give us 16 con and 18 charisma. The dexterity, we will be wearing heavy armor. So this dexterity is basically for initiative. There are 2 big flaws with this build. One is initiative and one is mobility. So having a higher dexterity score solves the initiative problem that this character build has. The Constitution is going to increase our saving throws in that regard for that attribute, as well as just give us more health overall. And this will add up once we have 12 levels in. Since we're a frontline character, we want to make sure that we can survive out there. The Charisma is, as I said, going to be used for actually rolling our 2-hit and our damage modifiers once we get the Warlock multiclasses. So that's the reason we're boosting this stat, and we'll continue to boost these 2 with that ability improvement at level 4. For the skills here, I like to take Intimidation and Persuasion. This character has a high charisma. Intimidation and Persuasion are incredible for dialogue options, which make this a great candidate for your main character that you're playing through the story. You can initiate a lot of the dialogue and so forth. And also this gets even better if you're running with a bard in your party who can then add the bardic inspiration on top of these scores as you do the DC checks and so forth. And it just makes this incredibly powerful and allows you to really handle pretty much every situation for the most part. I would say that charisma is probably the strongest main stat to have in terms of dialogue options through the playthrough. At level 2, we'll gain a spell slot as well as Divine Smite. Divine Smite is basically the bread and butter of this build. We're going to be using spell slots for the majority of cases just for getting Divine Smite up. And take note here that on a miss, it does not spend a spell slot. This means we can just spam this over and over, trying to basically expend all of our spell slots, and every time we land hits with this, it just does additional damage. For the fighting style here, you could go great weapon fighting. When you roll a 1 or 2 on a damage die for an attack with a 2-handed melee weapon, the die is re-rolled. In terms of your overall damage, the actual roll that you do for your melee weapon is not that important because you're adding in all kinds of modifiers with this build. And keep in mind that if you roll a 1 or a 2, it's re-rolled once, meaning you could still then roll another 1 or a 2. What I've actually found more beneficial is just to increase my armor class by using the defense passive. Now, like I said, you could choose either one, and if you want to see more big numbers more often, then great weapon fighting is just fine. But in my experience from what I've seen, I really think that defense just allows you to survive longer, and you don't actually get that much of a damage advantage from having the great weapon fighting style. For prepared spells, again, we're basically trying to expend all of our slots using Divine Smite. So we're really trying to conserve these. We don't want anything that's really going to use up a spell slot unless we're getting tremendous value in return. So what I choose here is actually 3 smites: Searing Smite, Thunderous Smite, as well as Wrathful Smite. And this is just to give us options for the damage type that we do: Psychic, Thunder, as well as Fire. So now we're no longer limited to just our physical damage or even radiant damage, which we have a couple of buffs for already. We can now deal many types of damage, and this just increases the versatility of this build. If the enemy has resistances and so forth, there's nothing worse than having a hard-hitting character that can't do any damage to a target. So in this case, it is nice to have the ability to get these off and do some damage. The next 2 spells that I take is Divine Favor. Your weapon attacks deal an additional 1 to 4 radiant damage. Now this is a bonus action, so again, this is something that we can cast, last for 3 turns, and then deal additional damage. This is basically just another version of Inquisitor's Might, except for it uses a spell slot. The other spell I like to take here is Bless. You can bless up to 3 creatures, gaining a 1d4 bonus to attack rolls and saving throws. This is nice to have even if you want to pre-buff yourself rather than using it in combat. If you know there's something that looks like a fight coming, you can always pre-buff yourself with Bless and then have the advantage of this, a 5 to 20% increased chance to hit during that encounter. Very much pays off, especially as you get to level 8 and we start taking the great weapon fighting feat. At level 3, we'll get several things. However, not many of them are going to see that much use for this particular build. So what I'd rather do is just talk about Hunter's Mark. This may get some use here. This is a level 1 spell slot. And again, we want to be conservative with our spell slots. However, this has the ability to recast once the target goes down. So on big fights, this is often worth the spell slot, especially if you know you're going to rest after. You can use this, not worry so much about that 1 spell slot, and then you know you're going to be recovering it afterwards. Divine Health. This will prevent disease from affecting you, as well as an additional spell slot. For that additional spell slot, I like to take Shield of Faith at this point. Protect a creature from attacks, increasing your armor class by 2. Again, you'll be in the front line. But not only that, this has an 18-meter range. So if you have to protect somebody else in your party, this can often do the trick from wherever you are positioned. But in general, like I said, you want to be conservative with the spell slots, and typically you'll be better off saving that spell slot for Divine Smite than casting this. But there aren't a whole bunch of other options that work great with this build. Level 4, we'll gain an additional charge for Lay on Hands, which is great, just some more utility healing. And like I said, this starts to really scale up pretty nice for you as the game goes on and you get more levels. We'll gain an additional spell slot here. At this point, I take Compelled Duel. Essentially, this works as a taunt, lasts for 3 turns, and it's a bonus action. This is really the deciding factor for me, is just having access to this as a bonus action, allowing me to still go off and use my attacks during that round. However, I very rarely use this, and it just has to do with I'd rather save my spell slots for the Divine Smite. You may get some use out of it, but overall, a couple of these spells that you've got prepared just won't see use because you'll be looking to prioritize your own damage output. For the feat, we'll take ability improvement, as I mentioned, and we're going to bump our Constitution and Charisma up to give us even numbers. And this will basically be where our stats will stay as we finish the game, unless we get any pieces of equipment or make use of the items found throughout the game in order to modify them. Level 5, we get some good stuff here. We're actually going to get a spell slot for level 1 as well as level 2. We'll get a pair of them there. An extra attack, so this is big. We're basically going to have the ability to double our damage output. Top of this, we get access to the level 2 spells as mentioned. And for our Oath, we're actually going to get Hold Person, which is a nice spell to have in general. We can hold them, and then attacks are always a critical hit if we're within 3 meters. This is often worth a spell slot over Divine Smite, depending on the situation, if you have a good chance to hit the target, which you should with your relatively high charisma. And on top of that, we get Misty Step. This is enormous, and this is the reason that I like the Oath of Vengeance subclass so much. It's because we lack mobility and we lack initiative. This dramatically solves the lack of mobility. Now, you don't want to go Misty Stepping every single turn because you'll run out of spell slots to do massive damage from your Divine Smite, but at least you have this to ensure that you can get on a target or get out of danger whenever it's needed. For the spell slots, I like to pick up the Branding Smite. Again, this is just going to give us access to additional radiant damage if the situation is favorable for that. And I take Aid. This is going to heal all of our allies and increase their maximum hit points by 5. And this is a 9-meter range. It's not as good as, say, Healing Word that has an 18-meter range, but this is the best we're going to get as the Paladin class. This just works nicely to be able to pick up a party member and reposition yourself if you have to do that. So be careful about using it and make sure that you are able to do enough damage to kill the targets as well, but you will make use of this at some point to pick a party member up or just protect your party overall since it affects everybody. The actual total hit points that it provides is actually fairly nice. character level 6, we're going to put our first level into Warlock, and we're going to do this up until level 10. So we're going to gain some cantrips, spells, as well as a subclass here. For cantrips, I would select Eldritch Blast as well as Blade Ward. Eldritch Blast is an excellent ranged option. And again, this will deal a different type of damage than we have access to at this point. We can now do force damage, as well as have a pretty reliable ranged attack given our charisma. So incredibly nice to have. Blade Ward, take half the damage from bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing attacks. I actually think there are some good options for utility here, whether it be Mage Hand, Minor Illusion, and so forth. I had these options covered by my party personally, but you can certainly select any of them here. I would say those are good candidates if you don't have them covered yourself. For subclass, we're going to select the Fiend. This is going to give us access to Dark One's Blessing. When you reduce a hostile creature to 0 hit points, the gift from your patron grants you 5 temporary hit points. This is just nice to increase our survivability. We'll often be getting killing blows with the massive amounts of damage that this character does in melee range, so it's a nice way to kind of consistently have 5 temporary hit points. For spells, we're going to take Armor of Agathis. Now this does not stack with the subclass, the Fiend, in terms of temporary hit points. However, what we really want from this is the 5 cold damage it deals to any creature with a melee attack. There will often be enemies in melee range of us as we're kind of pushing the front lines and so forth. So this amount of damage that it does rhetorically actually really adds up throughout the course of the game. On top of that, we'll take Hellish Rebuke. You can react to your next attacker with flames that deal 2 to 20 fire damage. What I like to do with this personally is just save the reaction until it can basically kill something off. You do a lot of damage with your melee attack, much more than this spell will do. So I kind of reserve this for picking off a target that's low, saving me an additional action on the next turn or round, so to speak. You have an option with Expeditious Retreat as well. However, having Misty Step at this point through the Oath of Vengeance on the Paladin side should prevent you from needing this, but if for some reason you built your Paladin with a different oath, then this might be an option that you want to take, and typically I would recommend taking this over the Hellish Rebuke if that were your situation. At character level 7, we're going to get access to a spell as well as 2 Eldritch Invocations. For the spell, I like to select Burning Hands here. We have very limited AoE spells, and since we're always in melee, if we're holding a choke point, there are some situations where you get several or more enemies lined up in a manner in which you can actually cast Burning Hands and hit them all. So this has some situational use, and I find it more beneficial to have this than the other remaining options. Eldritch Invocations, take Agonizing Blast. This is going to add your Charisma modifier to the damage that Eldritch Blast does. Again, just making this the best range option we have if we're unable to get into melee range. Top of that, I like to take Repelling Blast. When you hit a creature with Eldritch Blast, you can push the creature up to 4.5 meters away from you. This is nice just because it allows you to shove enemies off at range, making them take fall damage, killing them depending on how far they fall, and so forth, and really just synergizes well with what we're doing here. Character level 8, we'll gain another spell, a level 2 spell, as well as Pact Boon. For the spell slot, I like to take Cloud of Daggers. Same reason as I took Burning Hands, it just gives us an AoE option, and Cloud of Daggers is an incredibly strong AoE spell. This is often worth using over a Divine Smite in terms of the spell slot. Pact Boon, we're going to take Pact of the Blade. Essentially what this will do is allow us to activate this at the beginning of a day and use our Charisma modifier instead of our Strength modifier, and that's the reason why we stacked our Charisma as opposed to our Strength. At character level 9, we're going to gain a cantrip as well as a spell. For the cantrip, I like to select Minor Illusion. Now, I have this covered by somebody else, as I mentioned. However, sometimes you can actually take advantage of having more than one character with this. You can put illusions in multiple spots at the same time, and basically it just adds to your ability to thieve or sneak and so forth. So that's what I ended up doing here, and it worked pretty well for me. For spells, going to select Mirror Image. This is going to essentially increase your armor class by 9, and every time you lose one of your duplicates, it'll be reduced by 3. But overall, this is just an enormous survivability increase, and since we're on the front lines, this just makes a tremendous boost to our character. And again, this is a spell that I think is worth using, depending on the situation, over Divine Smite for that spell slot. Level 9, we're also going to get another feat here, since we're now 4 levels into Warlock, and I would recommend Great Weapon Master. Nice thing about this is when you land a critical hit or kill a target with a melee weapon attack, you can make another melee weapon attack as a bonus action that turn. Like I said, we're going to have access to bonus actions. It took us 9 levels to get here to have something that does massive damage. We've been utilizing things that boost our damage by 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 up until this point. So at this point, we can kind of replace our thought process in terms of that. But this is only if we get a critical hit or kill the target. So we may want to think about what the situation is, and you may still want to buff your damage otherwise, in case you don't think you can get a killing blow. On top of that, we're going to have -5 to hit. At this point, we should have a pretty consistent chance of hitting, as well as access to things like Bless before we get into combat and so forth that'll add to our chances of hitting to kind of negate or counteract this. And we get a massive damage bonus of 10 damage every time we land a hit. And since we're going to be getting 3 attacks per round as we get to the level 5 Warlock at the very next level, this starts to add up quickly. Character level 10, we'll put our 5th level into Warlock. We'll gain a spell as well as another Eldritch Invocation. For the spell, I would say you could pick between Counterspell or Fireball, or certainly anything else that you think is beneficial to you at this point. But I would say that these are probably the front runners. Fireball if you want to have another source of massive AoE damage, and Counterspell just adds a ton of utility. One thing that I like about the Counterspell is just whether that's being cast on you or a party member, you still have the ability to react to this. So you can definitely make some huge saves with this spell. And it's nice to have as many characters with this as possible, in my opinion. So personally, I actually go with Counterspell. Eldritch Invocations, I take Devil's Sight. You can see normally in darkness, both magical and non-magical, to a distance of 24 meters. Just allows us to really do more damage consistently. Like I said, mobility is one of the big issues with this build. So if we can't reach a target and they're in the shadows, well, we're just going to have a really low chance of hitting with our Eldritch Blast. And this really kind of counters that. At character level 11, we're going to go back into Paladin to get to level 6. Now this is going to give us access to Aura of Protection, which is going to increase the saving throws of ourselves and nearby allies. This is very strong, and this is an incorrect tooltip where it says +0. You will get benefit from this. So this is very strong overall, and which is part of the reason why we choose to go back into Paladin, and we'll also put that final level in Paladin as well, as mentioned. For prepared spells at this point, I like to take Heroism. Again, there's really just nothing else to take at this point. This will make you immune to Frightened and gain 5 temporary hit points each turn. This can also be cast on another target, so we have multiple sources of temporary hit points. So the reality is, if you were going to use this, you would most likely cast it on a different party member. But in general, I pretty much never use this, but there's kind of slim pickings at this point. You could also choose to take something like Lesser Restoration, where you can now recover from disease, poison, paralysis, blindness, etc. So you could go more of a utility route as opposed to a survivability route at this point as well. And I'll leave that choice up to you. Character level 12, we'll put another level into Paladin. This is basically just to get an additional spell slot, which is an additional Divine Smite, as well as having Relentless Anger. If you hit an enemy with an opportunity attack, your movement speed increases by 4.5 meters on your next turn. Just kind of counteracting the lack of mobility that we have in general, and just adds and rounds out the build to its final iteration. For prepared spells at this point, I pick up Command. To tell you the truth, this is really just to have an extra spell slot to use Divine Smite. I think at this point you've pretty much exhausted everything that you're going to get benefit out of for this particular character. Not to say that these spells remaining don't have use on other characters, but since the spell slots are so important to this character, specifically for Divine Smite. For an equipment setup, I'm using Helldusk Helmet. Now, we have better than Infernal Sight through our Warlock class, so what I'm actually gaining from this is the magical durability +2 bonus to saving throws against spells, as well as making it so that we can't be critically hit. Very important, especially if we're taking a large number of attacks. Cloak of Protection, this is for +1 to armor class, as well as +1 to saving throws. Blackguard's Plate, so it has a very high armor class in general. On top of that, we reduce damage that comes our way by 1. Advantage on wisdom saving throws on top of that. Blackguard's Gauntlets, +1 to strength saving throws, as well as +1 to attack. Blackguard's Greaves, Strider movement, you gain Long Strider. This is just going to give us 3 meters additional movement, as well as Athletics +1. This just helps counteract some of that mobility issue that we have. Using Baldur's Giant Slayer, this is going to give us a +3 weapon enchantment. Also Giant Form, which is incredibly powerful just to have at your disposal. And the Giant Slayer, on a hit, double the damage from your Strength modifier. And it's important to note that this actually works with Pact of the Blade. What will actually happen if you have Pact of the Blade is you'll get your Charisma modifier and then 1 Strength modifier. If you don't have Pact of the Blade active, because perhaps you're using the gauntlets that give 23 Strength, you'll just get 2 Strength modifiers. But this will in fact work with Pact of the Blade. Now I have Surgeon's Subjugation Amulet. Once per long rest when scoring a critical hit on a humanoid, you can cause paralyze for 2 turns. Incredibly strong, especially if you synergize this with Killer's Sweetheart. After you kill a creature, your next attack roll will be a critical hit, so you can finish off a target or just straight kill a target, use the bonus actions that you're getting from like the Great Weapon Proficiency, and then cause it to paralyze another target that you want to lock down. Finally, I have Spurred Band. During combat, when the wearer starts their turn with 50% hit points or less, they gain momentum. Again, just another way to add some movement speed if I need it or need to escape. The ranged weapon here doesn't matter at all. I happen to have just a +2 bow, with Dark Veil Precision, but you're going to be using Eldritch Blast in place of this pretty much in every occasion. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.